Well, good morning, everyone. It's so good to be with you again. And thank you so much for the way you've set up the space. Again, I think I mentioned to you last time, it's very helpful to be able to see the faces of the people that I'm speaking with. Um, I often prefer much more of a conversational type of Dharma teaching, and that can be a little challenging when you're online. But it really is helpful to see the folks in the room, and also just to welcome those that are joining us on Zoom. You're appearing in tiny little boxes to the side of my screen, so I can't see you so well. But it is really nice to have you also join in. So I thought for this morning that we could start with a little sit, just because you've already been practicing some, and I thought it would be nice to try to include the three awakening factors that we explored last time of mindfulness, investigation, and energy, and see if we can fold that into a little sit. It won't be a long sit because, again, we've got a lot to cover today, and I'm also hoping that we can have a little more conversation. Again, just to sort of have our own direct lived experience of those three factors as they may be known for you as you sit. Yeah. So as always, take your time to settle into a comfortable posture. This can be very helpful to not rush into right away, close your eyes, but as part of arriving into meditation, to move your body a little bit and make sure that you are as comfortable as you can be in this moment. So a little stretching and a little time to settle in can be helpful. And then as a first starting point, you might just become aware of your body sitting in this moment, feeling the sit bones, feeling your hands resting in your lap. And noticing if there's any unnecessary patterns of holding in the body that you might be able to soften some. And not demanding complete relaxation, but just as a gentle invitation. What would happen if I just invited my body to settle some? Noticing the jaw, seeing if there's any tension patterns that could be softened. The belly. And then just becoming aware of where your attention is right now. What's being known with mindfulness in this moment? Is it the whole body sitting? Is it the breath? Are there thoughts and maybe sounds? So just a general sense of what's happening right now in this moment. What are you aware of? And then seeing if there's a place within your experience where you could relatively easily return your attention to. A place that can become your base camp, your anchor, a place to ground the attention. Maybe the rising and falling of the belly, breathing. Letting the breath be natural. Just noticing inhales and exhales and receiving those sensations. If the breath is not a comfortable place for you to pay attention, you could experiment with having your hands as your base camp, as your anchor of attention. Perhaps noticing them touching each other or touching your legs. And again, letting the awareness itself be very receptive, just receiving sensations coming and going, warmth, coolness, tingling. And again, letting the attention itself be very receptive, not tightening around what you're paying attention to, but letting yourself receive either the breath or the sensations in your hands. And just as a place to gently come back to whenever the mind has wandered off into thinking, anticipating, worrying, fantasizing. With a patient, kind tone, when you become aware of mind wandering, just noticing that, mind has wandered. And then again, inviting attention to come back and rest with your base camp, your anchor. One more time, just receiving whatever can be known here with your mindfulness. The attitude is patient and kind. And you may try to add interest, curiosity. What's happening here? What am I aware of? What are those sensations? How might I describe them to myself? Each breath a different breath. Some breaths are short breaths, long breaths, deep breaths, shallow breaths. Bringing interest, curiosity to that experience. What might I discover about breathing or my hands as I'm sitting here? Could I take interest? The mindfulness, paying attention without judgment, a type of intimacy with what's happening, investigation, interest, curiosity. What's happening now? Can I get a little closer? Can I examine this? Can I really pay attention with interest, curiosity, investigation? And now evoking this last factor of energy, a type of courageous energy. Perhaps a sense of sitting upright, really paying attention, giving it your full attention, your wholehearted attention. Perhaps there can be this sense of this type of curiosity enlivening your interest, enlivening your body and mind, giving rise to energy. What's happening now? Each moment shifting and changing. And now in a moment, we'll return to opening our eyes and having some conversation. So whenever you're ready, releasing the meditation and just like you came in, coming back and maybe stretching your body a little bit, gently opening your eyes, receiving sights. I think the first thing I want to say is that whatever happened, it's okay. So if you did not experience this progression that I was pointing to, it's totally fine. You know, it takes time, and this was a very short little guided sit we did. It was more again to try to again give you an opportunity to have your own direct experience with some of these factors. And even if right now there might have been a lot of sleepiness or fatigue in the mind or a lot of mind wandering, again, that's totally fine. I actually feel pretty confident that there has been times in your practice where you have, even in small ways, tapped into some of these factors. So that's if they didn't arise now, you may still know that you have had them in small doses at some point in your practice. So the three factors that we explored last time and that I wanted to just point to before we go on today was the factor of mindfulness. The Pali word is sati. The factor of investigation or curiosity, as we often translate it. The Pali word is dhamma-vicaya. And then the last factor of energy. Last time I spoke about it as it could have a felt sense of a type of courageous energy or a sense of determination that can arise in our practice. And the Pali word for this energy is dhamma-vicaya, or viriya. Sorry, viriya is the Pali word for energy. So what I was starting to point to last time, and what I think can be really helpful, is to remember, and this actually really excites me each time I remember this, is that these factors progress quite naturally. When we begin with mindfulness, the factor of mindfulness quite naturally begins to give rise to the next factor, and then the next factor gives rise to the next factor. So there is this sort of natural unfolding that happens even from just our simple mindfulness practice. And I find this very comforting to know that there's a natural progression, and all we have to continue doing is establishing mindfulness. And then in some ways, the rest will take care of itself. When that is said, and I think I mentioned that last time also, there is a way that we can gently pay attention to and be aware of the factors as they arise quite naturally that will support their deepening development, which is why it can be helpful to have a talk like this and see, might I know just this in tiny ways in the here and now or at another point in my practice, so that in your formal practice and informal practice you can begin to have this awareness. So last time we talked about that often mindfulness is translated as presence, which is true. There is a present moment awareness with mindfulness. But there's another layer to mindfulness which has to do with our witnessing capacity, observing what's happening in our own direct experience. So we're right there, very present, for example, with the breath, feeling the actual sensations, or maybe feeling the sensations in our hands. We're really right there with present moment experience. But we're also able to witness it, observe it a little bit, I wouldn't say at a distance, but with this type of observation that can sort of gather data about our experience as it's happening in the here and now. So quite often teachers will translate sati, mindfulness, as intimacy. And I really love this translation because, again, it speaks to this coming close with our experience, coming right in to make connection with our experience in this very open-ended, receptive way. So again, as we sit with the breath, or as we sit with the experience of body, or as we receive the sounds or experience the hands, there can be this sense of like really allowing, the sounds to touch us, or the breath to touch us, or sensations in the hand to be known in this receptive way, where it feels like we're intimately knowing our experience. And then, of course, the mind is going to wander off and get distracted. And so, again, also to remember that uh, that happens all the time, right? So, we're not demanding perfect mindfulness all the time. That happens through cultivation. We might have little moments of becoming aware, of waking up. And that's really a golden moment. That's a great moment to be aware of. Awareness is here again. Back online. What's happening now? Okay, aware. What am I aware of? So all those moments of mindfulness begins to support more moments of mindfulness. So it's really important that we celebrate that moment when mindfulness arises, and that it's like, great to be here, great to be aware. What am I aware of? And that begins to support, again, this natural wish to become more mindful, to become more aware. But again, just to say, mind wandering is natural and it happens all the time. And we try not to make it too much of a problem or judge ourselves when the mind is distracted. So, as we also explored last time, when mindfulness is there, this type of intimacy, quite often it naturally begins to give rise to this experience of curiosity. So, it's a very interesting thing that happens is that we think that what we pay attention to has to be interesting for us to be interested, but actually it's the other way around. It's the how we pay attention to experience that gives rise to the sense of interest in the mind. Isn't that mind-boggling? It's because quite often we chase, right? So, what's the next interesting thing? When something feels boring to us or uninteresting, we're looking for something more stimulating, thinking that then we'll be interested. And quite often there might be with something more stimulating, there might be this hit of interest, but then quite often it fades off, and now we're on a chase for the next stimulating thing that can give us this sense of interest. But that's the amazing thing, and you may have experienced this, in meditation, but also maybe just, when you've been out in nature, and maybe you've been on a vacation, where the mind has settled some, and there's more quiet, and you're more available, you're more mindful for present moment experiences. And then you may have noticed, that, sitting and observing a sunset or observing the waves coming in and out on the beach, can be quite interesting in itself. And you're available with mindfulness for that experience. And that interest or that availability sort of lights up the experience for you. And it becomes more alluring, more interesting. It draws you in with your attention. So that's good to know, that when mindfulness is there and we pay attention in this sort of present moment, witnessing way, it really does begin to give rise to this sense of even the breath can be interesting, that we can take interest in very subtle experiences. And then this begins to quite naturally give rise to the factor of energy. We feel energized by curiosity, and you might know this from a hobby, right? That, you give it your full attention. There's mindfulness there. You're really paying attention, and you become curious about what you're paying attention to. And then you get energized, right? We know this from a hobby, right? Where we can spend, a lot of time doing something, and the time just flies by, and all of a sudden it's like hours have gone by, and we feel really involved with what we have paid attention to, and and energized by it. We're not drained by that activity, but energized by it. So it's interesting that there is this sort of progression that can happen in our practice as well, when mindfulness begins to become a little more continuous, that these factors naturally begin to arise. So we'll go on to the next factors, and I just want to check the time here. The factor of energy quite naturally begins to give rise to the next factor of joy. The Pali word is pīti. So sometimes we translate that as joy, sometimes as delight, sometimes as rapture. And when I first heard the word rapture, that sounded like really big, like rapture, that sounds like something really huge. And it can be really big, this experience of delight and joy, pīti. But one way we can think about rapture is as a rapt attention. Our attention gets wrapped in with what we are attending to. So the function of that is that a lot of our usual habits of distractions quite naturally begins to fall away again because of this type of rapt attention. Not because we're making the mind stay with the breath or stay with the hands or stay with some thing that we're paying attention to, but because, again, we're delighted by what we're paying attention to. We are wrapped into what we're paying attention to. Our deep interest in it, again, brings this type of rapture. And again, I want to invite you again to think about times in your life where you might have had touched this, and again, I keep returning to nature experiences just because, again, working with students, that's where people often report, again, that there's a quietness of the mind, there's a presence, there's mindfulness, there's interest, and there's energy that arises with that experience. And then there can be this sense of like really being wrapped with watching the sunset or hearing the waves or walking in the woods, that you're delighted, joyfully delighted by, again, what's happening right now in front of you. So it can be a type of sort of energetic joy also, that can be felt like um, a sense of an uplift or a sense of like vitality in the body, vitality moving through the body as this pīti begins to grow. And then what's really interesting is that the pīti, the joy, the delight, this sense of really uplift, joyous uplift, rapt attention, quite naturally begins to give rise to the next factor of tranquility, which is often for many quite puzzling, if we think about this delight, this pīti as soda bubbles, or Coca-Cola, really sort of delightfully uplifting. We can think about the tranquility as a type of like a hot chocolate. It has a deeply soothing effect on our whole body-mind system. And often we can think, how does that happen? How does something that has been sort of uplifting, it has an upgoing energy, turn into this deeply calming type of tranquility of the mind and the body? But But, we might think about, when we've had a really good laugh, or we've gone for a run, or we've done some kind of a workout, that it's been very energizing for us. There's been a lot of energy and a lot of expansion of energy. And as that activity settles, then we often feel like a deep relaxation, a deep calm. That's just a more mundane, everyday example of how, uplifted energy can transform into something that's very soothing or calming. So with tranquility, the Pali word is passaddhi. We often talk about that there's, passaddhi of the mind, tranquility of the mind, but also tranquility of the body. That the body becomes quiet, the body becomes very calm, relaxed, and the mind also becomes very calmed and relaxed. Like an absence of agitation in the body and the mind. So it's often accompanied by another factor that's called sukha. Often the translation is happiness, which is a deep sense of contentment with the present moment. It's the sense nothing else needs to happen right now. I can feel deeply contented with this moment, just the way it is. And as I describe this, again, I want to invite you to know, because we all have experienced this in small ways, maybe not on the cushion, but at some point in your life to right now search your mind and say, okay, where have I known this sense of deep contentment? Maybe a hot bath, or maybe after a long day when you put your head down on the pillow, or again, if you had a good belly laugh at some point, or a really good conversation, and the conversation dies down, and now you're just sitting there again and feeling very centered, present, and contented with the moment just the way it is. That's the factor of passaddhi. This passaddhi, this tranquility, then gives rise to the next factor of mind. The Pali word is samādhi. Often samādhi is translated as concentration, but it's definitely not the type of sort of tight concentration that we often think about in the West when we hear the word concentration. I have to concentrate my mind, I have to focus my mind, I have to put my mind on something. Often we feel a sense of tightness with that, like it causes strain, or there's a lot of doing with it, and a lot of sort of tight putting my mind, to pay attention. Often students think about times, when they were in school, and they had to do their homework, right? And they didn't want to do the homework. And parents said, no, you got to do your homework, right? And then we had to sort of really, in a very deliberate, tight way, make our minds stay on the object. So it's not this type of concentration. That's just to say that it's a concentration that naturally arises out of the tranquility. Isn't that cool? So often a better word for that we often use, or another word that we often use for samadhi, is collectedness and gatheredness and unification of the mind. And actually the word samadhi, a more correct translation of the word samadhi, is a bringing together. So we can think about it as a bringing together of all the scattered energies in the mind, all the agitated energies of the mind, all the energy that goes here and there and everywhere. And all those energies are gathering, collecting, and unifying and settling, so that it's very easy for us to stay with the one thing that we're paying attention to. Not out of tightness or making the mind stay, but out of a natural settling with ease and with comfort. So an image we can think about is like putting down a glass of water, right? So we walk around with the water and the surface is rippled and agitated. And when there's this deep sense of settling that happens with the factor of tranquility, that water naturally settles as we settle. And then the mind becomes clear, like that surface of the water. And all the agitation falls to the bottom of the water. If there's things in the glass of water, it naturally settles. And now sort of the mind is clear and collected and unified. Um, it turns out that this factor of samadhi feels really great. So a definition of samadhi could be that there's an absence of the usual agitation, the usual hindrances, the usual being pulled in all directions. And the mind is quite easily able to stay with what we're paying attention to. And this type of freedom from distractions, it turns out that it actually feels really yummy to us. It feels really good to us when the mind is in this place of not feeling so scattered, not feeling so distracted. The Buddha talked about it as a type of temporary liberation, that our mind is temporarily liberated from some of the painful habit forces of the mind that always leans forward into the next moment, wanting the next pleasant hit or wanting to get away from some unpleasant experience. That in that moment when the mind is gathered and unified, it's in contentment, it's temporarily freed. And so it gives us a pointer, a reference point for where this path is leading. Again, it's not when we get up from meditation, and that state of samadhi disperses again into the normal, agitated mind, distracted mind, that sense of deep peace also leaves us. But when we touch into these moments, even in small ways, it does give us a reference point for where this path is leading and what the type of peace that the Buddha was talking about, a peace of feeling contented, feeling at peace, feeling settled, feeling undistracted, not being pulled around by, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral experiences so much. So a great reference point for us to have within our own experience, to know, where is this path leading? It also becomes a support for the clear seeing, for really seeing our deep habit patterns with a lot more clarity. That when that water settles, when small agitations then begin to arise in the water because it's so settled, we can see the ripples of those agitations with a lot more clarity. Whereas that if that water is agitated all the time, we can't see anything with clarity and we can't understand, how it is that we get to feel distressed. But when we have that reference point of that settled water, then when a little, fantasy about the future arises, or a little anticipation about the next moment, or a memory about the past, and some bad memory arises, then we can see that arising and we can see that ripple with a lot more clarity, and we understand, okay, this is an absence of peace. There was peace, there was settledness, there was contentment, and now this thing that arose, creates this, uh, you know, uh, absence of peace. it creates a disturbance in the mind. And that really supports, and that's how the samadhi begins to support the clear seeing, the seeing how we get in trouble, and understanding, how we can free ourselves from the suffering habits that we are all involved in. So yeah, I think that that might be enough uh, for me at this point, because I really want to, speak to you about what we just talked about, and hear your voices and hear your reflections, and yeah. So we'll have a time to, to ask questions. But first, I have a question for all of you. I get really curious about, where might you have experienced this, even in small ways in your life? Where have you touched into some of these factors, and maybe the factor of samadhi, gatheredness, unification of the mind, and what was that experience like for you? Um, so take a moment and just see if you can connect with that. It takes a little training, right? Because quite often our mind goes to, oh, I don't know this, or my mind is so distracted or restless. So it takes a faith to trust that you would have known this for small moments. And if I can ask my mind to, become aware of that, then I might be able to remember a moment when my mind was somewhat gathered, somewhat contented, somewhat at ease, somewhat present. And what was that experience like? What might support for you this collectedness, gatheredness of mind? What are you becoming aware of as we talk about this? What are the conditions or the helpful supports that allow you to have these moments of feeling gathered, collected? There's no right answer. Yeah, it's very interesting that part of the temporary freedom and the deep well-being we feel when the mind is collected in samadhi is the absence of that reference point of a self, right? Because quite often, the story of self arises all the time. And it actually is part of the dukkha, part of the suffering we feel, this constant sense of a self in relationship, having an opinion about being for or against all of our experiences. That's very stressful. Um, so to discover that the most peaceful moments, there's an absence of that self-narrative, or it's very quiet. It's not as active, or sometimes totally absent. Um, Again, is another great pointer to what this path is about, and can give us some faith, that that will be more than okay if that constant self-narrative quiets down, and the sense of self is not at the center of all of our experiences, constantly relating to everything we see and hear and touch. There's an I that arises with that. So when the sense of self softens, and there's just receiving sights, receiving sounds, receiving breath, but not a lot of self-narrative. Oh, I'm gonna have another sunset next week, or, oh, it was so beautiful, but now that sound of the bird is a little agitating. Uh, you know, there's the story of self that arises with that, and a self that's going to do something in the future or did something in the past. And so the quieting of that self-production is part of the well-being that can come with the samadhi. And also it becomes the new reference point, right? When there's that moment of, or those experiences where the self-production quiets, that really becomes the reference point for then seeing the arising of that self-production again with a lot more clarity, and seeing it as dukkha instead of seeing it as sort of we live inside that identity. So we don't know it as dukkha, but we only notice it dukkha when there's been a temporary stepping out of that, and uh, then seeing it as it arises again. So we'll talk more about insight, and that was a little bit what I was talking about now, and which Kat was referring to, the insight into anatta, not self, that comes through this practice, and that is part of uh, supporting a deeper type of unconditioned peace. When we've seen things with wisdom, seen things with clarity, then there can be a deeper unconditioned type of peace that can be known. But we'll talk about that next time a bit more. So why don't we just end with just a little bit of letting all of that metabolize, all those words, the conversations, and finding your body, finding your breath, finding this moment within yourself. If the image of putting down the glass of water is helpful, you might just imagine, all I have to do is just put down this glass of water. Let it settle by itself. It won't be a perfect settling, but all the surface agitation can settle down. And seeing if there can be a natural sweetness, a natural contentment with something simple. Be feeling your breath, feeling your hands, noticing sounds. Could there be a sense of relief with just letting it be simple? You don't have to figure out your life right now. You don't even have to figure out what's going to happen after this brief sit is done. All you have to figure out is just, how do I meet this moment? Can I let this moment be enough? Breathing, being, sitting, experiencing. Letting your heart be nourished by the simplicity. Just right here, right now. Sitting, breathing, being. Hmm. And now taking a moment before we come back to conversation to see what you want to take with you from today's conversation. What might be one thing that you want to practice with or remember that you felt inspired by? that you've discovered, that you have remembered about your own experience. Just one simple thing that you can become aware of right now. To take with you into your life. Coming back to opening your eyes. Thank you, Sangha. Mm. Mm. If any of you have seen the monks walking for peace, walking across the states for peace, that's a great example of a group of people deep in samadhi as they're walking with a wholehearted attention on just walking. And one of the things these monks would say as a simple thing to practice with is every day they wake up and the invitation is, can I make this my peaceful day? So I felt very inspired by that. You know, what a simple thing to decide each morning. Could this be my peaceful day? So, wishing you all well and see you in April. Thank you so much.